Okay, so we are on page Reish Lamed Hey, Ois Beis. We're dealing with, the Rebbe is constructing for us a concept of or. We take or for granted. Or is one of the things in Chassidus that everyone thinks that we have it down pat. The or is the most profound, the most contradictory, the most paradoxical dimension of being that one can imagine. And this is going to come into play in this maamar. So right now, we haven't even gotten to the point, the whole focus of the maamar is Olam HaTohu and Olam HaTikkun. So in order to understand these Olamos, they've been described very cryptically and very laconically as Olam HaTohu is Ribui Or Miut Akelim, and Olam HaTikkun is Ribui Kelim and Miut Or. So what are we dealing with here? What does that actually mean? Is it a quantitative situation? Why are there these imbalances? And why does the imbalance of Oris V'Kelim of Tohu result in what from our perspective would be a disaster, which is really the Jewish history, if you want to put it that way, the result of why the world looks the way it looks. How did it happen? Why did it happen? What are the issues that we're dealing with here? And what does it mean for us now? So right now we're working on or. So or, we have a concept of or that the Rebbe began with a fundamental idea. We're talking about Chesed and Gevura, Oris v'Kelim. So instinctively we think of Or as Chesed and we think of Kelim as Gevura. And there's a good reason for thinking that, and it's from a different perspective. In fact, that would be the case. From this perspective, in which we're actually analyzing the very essence of Or, trying to come to some comprehension of its fundamental properties, if you will. So in fact, Or is Gevura because the nature of Or is Histalkus. The nature of Or is Aliyah, it is not Yerida. Nature of Or is Dveikus. It senses its Sharish, and therefore is in a state of Aliyah, seeking to lose itself within its source. That's the nature of Or. So that's the question, how does it ever get anywhere? Well, the reason how it gets places is because of Kelim. Kelim, the property of Kelim, which we haven't really discussed in detail, just enough to understand the dynamic of Or a little bit. So the nature of Kelim is the opposite. The nature of Kelim is Metzias, the nature of Kelim is Yerida, the nature of Kelim is Hamshacha. Well, the two antithetical things entirely. But clearly, the dimension of Keli is really what is ultimately responsible for the Or that's drawn down, the Or that's manifest, and the Or that becomes available. So really, in a sense, the story is really about the Kelim. The Or is obviously a critical dimension, a critical factor, but the dominant factor in determining the dynamic of the Or really is the Kelim. So before we begin, there's one thing we have to address, a very important question that Rabbi Winterfeld raised last week, a critical question. I dealt with it very briefly, but we have to look at it and understand it very, very well because it's going to come up, hopefully, in this evening. So it's going to come up in this ice. And it's extremely important for us in order to understand what Or is all about. So this is from the Shavuos maamar, the first night of Shavuos, Acharei Mos Mem Tes. Just a very short few lines, but it's something we have to keep in mind and put in our pockets to, it'll become useful to us, hopefully, in about 20-30 minutes. Hine Yedua. It's understood. Datzilus, hu bechinas gilui helam. Datzilus is begilui helam. It's not yesh ma'ayin. It's not anything which is nifrid. It's called an olam ein soif. So from atzmas ein soif to Atzilus, in a sense, nothing radical has happened. It's a matter of gilui. Gilui helam is a process in which there is no fundamental shinui in the evolutionary process. Things do not change in a fundamental way as they descend from a state of concealment in their source to a state of revelation in some dimension below. There's not what we call shinui muhus. There's no change fundamentally. Bechinas pnimius. I'm sorry. Who you do? Gilui helam. Mor ein soif hamaitzel. From or ein soif hamaitzel. So if it's sealess, is a gilui, not a nivra, not a mesuvav, not even an olul, from Or Ein Sof HaMaitzel. It is a Gilui from Or Ein Sof HaMaitzel. What does that tell us about the Aris of Atzilus? Aris of Atzilus, there are 10 of them. They're Meluvish and Kalim. Nonetheless, we know something fundamental that must be true of those Aris of Atzilus. What is the fundamental truth of that Or? What can we say about them? If it's Gilui Helam, it's Ma'ayin HaMa'or, right? The Ma'or is Ein Sof. Those Aris are Bli Gvul. Be'etzem. So it's counterintuitive. Because there are 10 of them. And not only there are 10 of them, but they're Meluvish and Kalim, which implies Hischalkus, which implies period, which implies a loss of the Bli Gvul dimension, in which the Or becomes mugbal in some way, at least as Chesed, as Gevurah, as Tferes, as what have you. But in essence, the Or is Ein Sof. And why? Because Or is Or. Or does not change. Go back to the mashal of the sun. You have sunlight coming from the sun that can, on a cloudy day, it's gray. You're sitting in a dark room with a crack in the wall. It comes through as a tiny little ha'ara. It passes through colored glass. It comes out red. It comes out green. So there are changes. The Or can change, both quantitatively and seemingly qualitatively from the source. Nonetheless, the ha'ara that hits your eye is the same stuff, Bli Shinui, without fundamental change, as was emitted from the source in the sun. Now, mind you, that Hara it can't tell you very much about the sun, but it tells you there is such a thing, and it tells you that the sun is a Ma'or. The main thing is that the Or does not change. So the idea of Or being Meluvish in the Kalim of Atzilus, this does not change the Or. It's not sufficient to change the Or, because we're still dealing with Gilui Helam, we're still dealing with Oros. This also tells us something about the Kalim of Atzilus, why the Or does not change, because certainly the spheres of Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya are of a different quality altogether. We'll get to that a little bit later on. So this is there, Gilui Helam, Or Ein Sof HaMaitzel, the whole Gilui Helam, Hari HaGilui Hu Ma'ayin HaHelam. When we talk about Gilui Helam, what are we talking about? We got a range of ways, a range of evolutionary scenarios. At one extreme, radical extreme, we have Yesh Ma'ayin. Something comes out of something else, but it is totally Be'ein Hareich to its source. On the other end of the extreme, you have Gilui Helam. There's no shinui at all. You go and start digging around in your backyard and you find a treasure chest. Oh, you're all excited, all thrilled. Gival, it's a whole new, no chiddush at all. Nothing happened. It was always there. Or at least it was there long before you dug it up. And so what happened? You simply revealed something that was there. Bli Shinui, the chest hasn't changed at all. A diamond you find in the mud, you have to clean it off. It's a little bit dirty, but it's fundamentally the same thing. That's Gilui Helam. Between this, we also have Etzem V'Spashtus, we've got a Koyach V'Poil, we've got Ila V'Olol, we've got Sivim L'Suvav. There are whole varieties of modes of interaction, modes of revelation. Gilui Helam is a very simple one. What you got at the source, that's what's emitted, Bli Shinui Muhus, without an essential change. Since Or Ein Sof HaMaitzel is Ein Sof, Mamish, Ein Shom Bechinas Hischalkus V'Hagbola Klal V'Klal. There is no Hischalkus, no Hagbola whatsoever, and this is perfectly clear to us. This makes perfect sense. Therefore, the Or which emerges from it and is misposhed from it, gam kein lo yischalik v'lo yugbal me'achar shu be'etzem built-in mugbal. Also, it is not particularized, not partitioned, it is not compartmentalized, and it's in essence limitless. Why? Because its source is limitless. The process from the source is Gilui Helam. Therefore, it comes without shinui. Doesn't mean there's no change altogether. It's simtsum. There's a big change. But the change is essentially, I hate to use these words because they're not exactly accurate, but the best we can come up with at the moment, this is essentially a quantitative change. The fundamental quality of Or does not change. Just simply the quantity, the impact of the Or is reduced. Therefore, the Giluyim which come from it are also Bli Gvul. That tells you that the Or of Chesed is Bli Gvul, the Or of Gvur is Bli Gvul, the Or of Netzach is Bli Gvul. V'zeh inyan, Masha Esesfiras Tatzilus, Hein B'chinas Ein Soif, Lispashtusans. What's the Lashon? The Lashon is that they are, the spheres of Atzilus, the Esesfiras of Atzilus are Ein Soif Mamish, how Ein Soif Lihispashtusan. In terms of their Hispashtus, they are Ein Soif. Vahinu shehein b'chinas bli gvul, which is to say they're bli gvul adayin. They remain bli gvul. Now the hispashtus, even though it's hispashtus ein soif, it's not hispashtus beyond atzilus. And even though it's hispashtus which is ein soif, the hispashtus of chesed is chesed. The hispashtus of gevura is gevura. But or, even though there are aspects of or of chesed or of gevura even before the Maluvshin Kalim, these are acquired characteristics. Fundamentally, the or is the same as when it was emitted from its source.
What do you mean ein safe lehispashtusan?
It means that
they are ein safe.
It means that it means that they're ein safe, but they're not the same ein safe as or poshet kardim at simsum. Okay. Because you have an Or of Chesed. You do not have Begili Or of Chesed Kardim at Simsum. You have an Or of Gevura. You do not have Begili and Or of Gevura Kardim at Simsum. So you have to add the Hispashtus because they're not exactly potent the same way. They're 10 after all. Now mind you, if you talk about Esesiris Haganuzas and Or, so that could take you to another thing altogether. But Baklal, that's the main reason. But the dimension of Ein Sof has to be there. V'gam da hakelim da tzilus she'en b'chinas koyach hagvul. So what about the kelim tzilus? They're koyach hagvul shabat tzilus. Haynu rak lepoil hagbalu chutz tzilus. They are koyach hagvul, but they themselves are not mugbal. They are magbil, which is to say that they restrict in a very real way in terms of their hispashtus beyond atzilus, which is no longer ein soif, no longer bli gvul, but they themselves are not mugbal. And we're going to see this again in some detail a little bit later on. This is primarily the sheet of the Ramak, and it's one which is very much favored by Chassidus, although there are other ways of looking at it. They're believable also. The whole story of Atzilus, it's an oilam ein soif, taka ein soif applies to the whole story. Okay, we are just to get the main thing is we're focusing on or not to have a concept that or has a fundamental change by emerging with the kelim of Atzilus, which of course is oilam Tikkun. Yeah, we're clear on this? Okay.
How is the bleak rule of kelim different from the bleak?
That's not our issue right now. We'll see a little bit later on. Ubira inyan. The explanation of the thing is like this. So we have we're dealing with the concept of or, and we have a mashal. We have a mashal for we have two mashalim for or that we've mentioned so far. One is the or, the shemesh, and the or shemesh, sun and sunlight. The other mashal, which is essential for us, is critical for us, is the mashal of Eish and Eish HaYisaydi, fire, and the fundament of fire, the spiritual source of fire, Lamaila. And the reason we need that mashal, why can't we do it just or light is light, But it's not, because or is not light. It shares certain properties, it has certain properties in common with what we commonly call light. But there are essential distinctions, essential differences. One of those essential differences, which we're going to get to in this ice, is the fact that light from the sun is simply mispajim. It has the light that emerges from the sun is not a state of aliyah. It's not a state of dveikus. It doesn't need something to extract it, to force it out of the ma'or, to go contrary to its nature, to expand and extend throughout the universe. It's b'derech mamela, because that's really the nature of physical light, the nature of the sun, nature of physical light. So in order to understand the or al pi Chassidus, what or really is, that or has the property of diffusion, there's no question about it, and it reveals the source the way sunlight reveals its source. However, by teva, by nature, it is in a state of aliyah, and in this sense, the concept of physical concept of light does not work for us, and we need the second mashal of the Eish. One sees the flame dancing on the wick trying to detach itself from the wick because it yearns for its source in Acharei Mos. That's not the case with physical light, so we need that dimension also. Critical because or, in fact, is the nature of or is to be dovik, which means that or there has to be something which is going to make the or, to reveal the or, is going to bring it into a state of gilui. Something aside from itself, because its nature is not to be megala. Something aside from itself, be it Ratzu and Shuv, be it Isrus L'Tata, a mitzvah done in this world, there's something which is going to make or go in the other direction and make itself available and reveal itself within worlds, including Atzilus.
How does sunlight reveal the sun?
I'm sorry?
How does sunlight reveal the sun?
How do you know there's a sun?
I don't know.
You don't see the sun, you see sunlight. But you look at it, okay? There it's in the sky. You see the sun, right? You're not seeing the sun, you're seeing sunlight. So the light is...
The sun, right? That's
I'm sorry, you're not, your eyes, there's no piece of sun entering your eyes. There's a light which emerges from the sun, which impinges upon the photoreceptors in the back of your eye, and that tells you what the sun is all about.
So
And it reveals it. It tells you it's round. It tells you it's yellow. It tells you that it's a luminary. It tells you everything you want to know about sun. You only know through sunlight. We have no direct experience of anything. We know it only through the aura that's emitted from it.
So light is the only thing which reveals in this world, basically.
That's another story because we could talk about other senses of the chushim, but we're not into that right now. Okay.
The mashal of the light of the sun.
Yeah.
It's expressing or.
Yes.
And you said that or is stalkus.
Yes.
Or aliyah.
Well, that's its fundamental nature. Yes.
Right. So I'm saying, like you said before, that the mashal with the fire, it's easier to see how it's a stalkus.
Correct.
The mashal of the sun, it's harder to see how it's a stalkus because it's doing the opposite. It's coming to us.
You can't say Stalkus altogether from the sun.
Right. Well, right.
Yeah.
But based on stalkus, it should want to be
That's
buckle
right.
in the
That's
maamar.
right.
It should go backwards.
All right. So what does it tell you? Is the or is not light.
Right.
It's just light is a useful metaphor in certain
Right, so it's a
respects.
mashal.
That's right.
Right.
Okay. Ubir hine you do beperish orain saif mashnik b'shem or so orain saif. So this is basically your issue. Why is it called or? I mean, in fact, the matter is it's not identical to the or that we know in this physical world. Why is it called or? B'shem or lahira sha'or eino isa shum shinui v'spilus b'hamor. So where is the mashal useful? Where is the example of sun and sunlight? Where does it come in as a valuable mashal for us in learning about this? Comes in that the or that emerges from the sun causes no hispilus or shinui in the ma'or. In other words, the sun emits light derech mamela. Okay? The sun does not get excited about it. The sun doesn't feel it has to do it. The sun gets no gratification from it. The sun doesn't even know what's happening. It is b'derech mamela. Why? Because the sun is created as a luminary. It does not have any ratzon. So that's what a luminary is. A luminary is something that emits light, and it emits it b'derech mamela. And the emission of that light in no way affects this is the great paradox here. The interesting, the wonderful thing is that the light truthfully and accurately reflects the ma'or. On the other hand, it's not the ma'or. It has no piece of the ma'or in it altogether. It's not a piece of sun. It's simply an illumination or an irradiation from the sun. So on the one hand, the beauty of or is that it reflects the ma'or, it reflects etzem, faithfully and truthfully. That's why Or Ein Sof stays Or Ein Sof, reflecting its shorish and Ein Sof. So it reflects the ma'or truthfully and accurately. On the other hand, its emergence or its engagement down here, its involvement down here, has absolutely no influence whatsoever on the body of the sun altogether. No influence on the more at all. Okay, it's a critical point. Yes.
The aspect that you brought up in the previous shir about Earth having dveikos.
Yeah.
Is that the fact that the Earth can never leave the sun, which means you can't just rip away the Earth.
No, because that's where the physical mashal does not work. Sunlight has absolutely no desire to hang around the sun. It just goes. It's energy. That's all it is an irradiation of energy.
So how is dveikos?
So dveikos is a proper. So why? So sunlight. It's dovik to the extent that it requires the sun. Okay, to that extent, yes, but it's not davik to the extent where it seeks and it yearns bittul and it's sharish. It does not have a hergish of the sun. It's davik in the sense that it's ayin with respect to the ma'or. You're right. That's quite right.
Wouldn't the word be Aish would be more. Fire does always go up, wherever you have it.
Aish, so Aish that's why we need that mashal. Look, none of these two things, neither sunlight nor the flame, are accurate representatives of the concept of or. Each one of them have something which gives us a little bit of insight into this essentially unknowable gilui, which we call or. The flame gives us the concept of dveikus, gives us a physical situation in which something which is light and which is fire seeks to ascend and be united with the charish. And the sun gives us the example of hinespashtus, which reflects the ma'or, but does not in any way influence the ma'or. So reflects the ma'or, does not influence the ma'or, is dovek and seeks inclusion in its source. There is no mashal that will handle all those three. You need the two. Okay? Remember, we're dealing here, we I don't know how to put it, we tend to be a little bit simplistic in the way we look at Chassidus, because quite often one mashal will be emphasized over another, depending upon the point of the maamar. Here we're trying to get a broad sense of what or is, and therefore we're trying to sense it in all of its dimensions.
Is or here being used as a descriptor of elukus?
Yes. The or is elukus.
Of some type.
Well, elukus reflects elukah, yes.
So you have all of these different descriptions that are coming together, which require different mashalim.
The different descriptors, so you can say, well, elukah doesn't have a bunch of descriptors. There's only one God, right? I mean, what can you say about etzem? Nothing. There's nothing to say. So if the or truly reflects etzem, then... But you have to understand, and this is actually brought up, it's a very good question, a very sophisticated one, and we can't go into any great length on this. We take or as a natural phenomenon because we use the mashal of the sun, and we're used to seeing or come from a ma'or. You have to realize Rabbi Shalom is not a ma'or. He does not have a job description which say your job is to make or, and from the or you can fashion it, be matzuntzim, you can put it in kalim, you can do all kinds of things. You get oilamais out of it. You can do all these things. That's your job. It's not his job. It's not automatic. It's not b'derech mamela that etzem should reveal itself as or as a chiddush, or as a givaldi chiddush. First of all, it's v'rtzainis, we'll see a bit later on, which or of the sun is not. And number two, it is a total singularity. He is alone by himself. He doesn't need anything. And here you have he's who. But then you got hu v'shmai. Well, where did that come from? Shmai is already there's hu v'shmai, or hu echad v'shmai echad. Or hu v'shmayach, depending upon what madregan or you want to look at, there is. All of a sudden, there is a second, I don't want to use the word thing, I don't want to use the word dimension, I don't want to use the word phase, but there are now two. There's hu, which is him, and there is shmai. Now the shmai is not a mitzias bifnei atzmai, so it's still only him, but it's a reflection, it's a tenua, a movement, or a tendency of etzem to reveal itself. And that revelation is called or. It's a chiddush, because the whole concept of revelation doesn't make sense. It's in a way more of a chiddush than yesh ma'ayin. So we're talking about or, and we're just using physical mishalim to get a description of something we can deal with. It doesn't, so how come we can't really get a handle? I mean, there's no one mashal for or. How come or is so contradictory? Seems to be so paradoxical, because it is an incredible chiddush. The fact of the matter is, it's the whole basis for understanding existence. The whole basis for understanding creation, the whole basis for understanding the Creator's involvement in creation, along with the idea of lo shanisi, I do not change. Which is a critical. So or is a medium of revelation. Do we understand it? No. Are we able to describe it? We are, thanks to Chassidus and thanks to these mashalim that we have, which we can pepper or around or and get some sort of a sense of an illumination, a revelation from Atzmus. Why is it davek b'makor? Why is its nature histalkus? Because that is its teva. Now, once you say that that's its teva, teva means its nature. Once you say that's its teva, book is closed, finished, nothing to say. Because teva is by definition something which is ma'ila matam v'das. We do not know. But once we've got it already, and we're given this information, we have some very, very rich material here with which to begin to grasp the nature of divine creation. Am I making any sense at all? Are we okay? Yeah. All right. Okay. If I'm not, do not hesitate to interrupt. Rabbi Sai, this is edel stuff. Okay. So there's no. So one of the beauties of the mashal of the sun is that there's no hispilus or there's no change in the sun, and there is no the sun is in no way affected by the consequences of it giving off light. It just gives off light. V'loi kamay hashefa. Now the Rebbe has come up with another term. We came across this term last week, shefa. We have an union of shefa. Most maamar will tell you that shefa is a lashon which one finds primarily in Sifrei Chakira, philosophical works, or we find in Kabbalah and Chassidus. They don't, in fact, exactly mean the same thing. So the Rebbe here is making a distinction between or and shefa, because after all, everybody said there are different ways of revealing. There are different ways of being Megala. One way of revealing is Or, which reveals Etzem. Sunlight reveals the sun. You can make no mistake about it. Seeing is believing. It's not exactly true either. But for our purposes, seeing is believing. The sun is yellow, it's round, that's what it looks like. The Or tells you exactly what you need to know about the Metzias of the sun, if not the Mohus. Shef is another kind of revelation, but doesn't reveal Etzem. It reveals a quality, it reveals a property, it's calculated, it's directed, it's focused, it's intended. None of that's true of Or. Or just goes, it's a revelation. We're going to see now the difference between these two things, which will give us yet another sense of what we mean when we're talking about Or. Al derech mashal, for example, hashpa'as haseichel shahamashpia nitves umutrid bahashpa'ah. You have a Baal Seichel and he has a Talmud. You have this is the mashal of the Rav and the Talmud. You have a Rav and you have the Talmud. So the Rav is teaching the Talmud, is giving over the Talmud. That is not Or. He's revealing. That's Or. That's Or HaSeichel. Is that not Or HaSeichel? Yes, it's Or HaSeichel. Then is that not really Or? No, that's not Or altogether. We could still use the Lashon Or HaSeichel because we don't have the name for it. That is really what is called Shefa. Why? Because the mashpia is attached to and grasped and engaged in giving over the shefa. So you can picture a Rav sitting before his Talmud and thinking in his mind, how am I going to be able to get this idea across? So a couple of things here. It's intended. It's focused. And not only that, but the Rav is stuck now, in a sense, because as long as he's thinking about the Talmud, and as long as he's thinking about this kind of Or, he can't be thinking about anything else. So he's nitfus, he's caught up in it himself. It's changed him, at least temporarily. In fact, it's changed him permanently, because as we well know, when a person gives over, you get illuminations that you didn't have before you gave over. Oisius draw down more seichel. So the Rav is engaged, he's enclothed, he's the revelation that we would call shefa is something that he's actively engaged in, as opposed to the sun, which the whole thing is just b'derech mamel, automatic. Shefa is not automatic. If it's automatic, that's what you call a lousy teacher. Okay? Umutrid bahashpa, mash ain't kain b'chinas Or v'mar. It's not the case of Or and Mar. The case of Or and Ma'ar, the Ma'ar, the luminary, gives off life. It's in no way affected by it at all. The Rav, on the other hand, is very much affected by shefa that he's giving off. Both are revelations, but they're very, very different types. One in which the Rav is engaged. The other thing is that the Or given off from the sun reflects Etzem. Or reflects Etzem. Hashpa of shefa does not reflect Etzem. That's not the Rav. You see, I remember that we had Baruch Hashem in this community, most wonderful, wonderful person, this Rabbi Yaakov Yurkovich. People did not appreciate what a goyin he was. In Nigla and in Chassidus, people did not appreciate his goodness and his kindness, his chesed. That everyone appreciated, but they didn't realize what kind of a mind he had. Because he taught 10-year-olds. And therefore, my kid would come home, Rabbi Yurkovich taught me this and this and this. The kid has no idea who Rabbi Yurkovich is. Was that Gili? Did Rabbi Yurkovich Megala himself? He did and he didn't. It wasn't Gili Etzem. It was a Gili that was tailored, that was changed, that was shifted, that was downscaled in order to enter the brain of a 10-year-old kid, because that's who he taught. Very, very much different than if you're dealing he's dealing with himself in his own mind, revealing himself to himself, which would be more along the lines of or. Ein bechinas or umar, ein hamaor nitvas umutrid ba'ara. So the difference obviously is that in the case of or and ma'or, light and luminary, the luminary doesn't trouble itself. There's no trouble for the luminary to give off or. Ukamayel derech mashal or v'ziv hashemish, for example, the or and the illumination from the sun, hameir la'aretz u'ledarim aleya, which shines down on the earth and those who dwell on it below. Ein ma'or hashemesh mutrid le'ir oirei. The sun does not have to trouble itself. It doesn't have to go to work in the morning and say, oh, I got to get that ore down there. I got to generate ore. It's not at all. It's not caught in it. It's not engaged in it. It's not involved in it in any active way. In a way, you could say sunlight is simply a passive consequence of the fact that the sunlight is a ma'or, is a luminary. On the contrary, the illumination of sunlight comes automatically. It's b'derech mamela. V'hu b'chinas gilui etzem. This is gilui etzem. If it weren't derech mamela, if there were an agenda, it's not etzem. Okay, he's selecting what he wants me to see. He has an agenda. This isn't the real McCoy. This is an intended, focused. This is what he wants me to see. Gilui or, this is what you see is what you get, because it's b'derech mamela. That's what it is. So or is megala etzem.
In terms of Gilui, or is higher than Shefa.
Depends on what you mean.
It's more revealing than Shefa.
It may be less revealing because there's no makabla for it. On the contrary, remember, or is gevura. Even or, which is in the getter of hispashtus, you have an or. You walk into a class, and there's a common error made in new university professors. They go in to give their first lectures, and they want to stun everybody with their brilliance. So they give fabulous lectures, huge hispashtus or. As far as the students are concerned, they might have been speaking Chinese, or might have just sat there for an hour and not said anything because the kids got nothing. That's not or, it's a hoishach. So higher and lower are relative terms depending upon perspective, depending on how you look at it.
Kaylee there.
Well, something, but the main thing is, in other words, we tend, again, intuitively, we think of or ein sof as being higher, but higher in what? Higher in kavana? Higher in what sense? It precedes, because without or ein sof, you can't get shefa. You got to have or ein sof at the outset, but in a sense of kavanah, in a sense of importance, or a sense of its place in creation, it's hard to say.
Could I just ask?
Yeah.
You're trying to explain the concept of or where the mashpia is not nitfis.
Right.
But you said that
we haven't talked about the mashpia being not nitfis. We're talking about the sun, which is not nitfis.
Right.
The mashpia mamish is nitfis, because if it were not nitfis, it wouldn't be a mashpia.
Right, okay. Amor, I used the word mashpia, I meant amor.
Yeah.
But before you said that the Eibishter's job description is not amor, and therefore he doesn't have to give off.
All right, we're going to get there.
So
we're going to,
so
Jack, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. Just
contradiction.
we're going to get there. Okay. It doesn't mean, just briefly, that because there is no tirda and there's no hisaskus, it doesn't mean that the or is automatic. It's not. It's b'derech mamel in terms of the process, but it's b'ritzaynus. And because it's b'ritzaynus, the mashal of the sun also breaks down. Because you could say, yes, the sun's b'derech mamel, it's automatic, the sun comes automatically, the sun doesn't have to engage in any particular way to do this, it just happens. So that, in a sense, is what or ein sof is like. The difference between the two, between the mashal and the nimshal, is that in the case of atzmus, it's b'ritzaynus. It does not happen. It happens automatically in terms of the process. It does not happen automatically in terms of intent. There's intention where there is no intention in the sun. We're going to see.
What is the meaning of Gili or Etzem?
Gili etzem means that it reveals its source. Now, etzem, it could refer to many, many different things. But if it's or, what you are looking at, what the or tells you is what's out there.
It's like the rays of the sun telling you that you're the sun.
The rays of the sun tell you that there's a sun. They tell you it's round. They tell you it's yellow. Pardon?
Is that Gilead?
That's Gilead. Okay. As explained elsewhere, V'gam ein nitfus umugdur ba'or shaharei meir b'chol makom b'shava. Not only is there no tfisa in etzem and no hisaskus in etzem, but also ein nitfus umugdur ba'or. The or itself, there's no tfisa or geder. What does this mean? Shaharei meir b'chol makom b'shava. Sunlight goes everywhere and everywhere the same. Doesn't focus in any particular place. V'gam poil kama pu'ulos, and it makes many pu'ulos. So over here is going to make a drought. Over here is going to make little daisies grow. Over here is going to make a drought. Over here is going to make it hot and humid. Over here it's not going to do anything because it's a cloudy day and nothing's coming through. So there are many pu'ulos. They're all different. Some are beneficial, some are not beneficial, and some are neutral. It's a matter of total indifference. The or it's not a matter of consideration at all for the or. So not only is the ma'or not nitfis in the process of revealing, but the or itself has no tfisa in anything. It just goes where it goes. It goes everywhere and everywhere the same. The circumstances of the or, whether they're going to create a drought or whether it's going to create a nice growing season, it depends upon local conditions in what's receiving it. V'gam poil kama pu'ulos. Avgam pu'ulos shoynos. Even though there are many different pu'ulos, many different actions of or. V'hakol b'shava achas. They're all equivalent. There is no distinction at all as far as the or is concerned between one or the other. Uzois ein ha'or poil shum shinui v'spailas b'etzem amor. So the or is not poil. Spilus or shinui etzem in the ma'or. The sun couldn't care less whether it makes a drought or whether it makes the daisies grow. She'ein shum typhus or giyorein be'etzem hashemesh. There is no. It's not nitfus. What the or does is of no consequence to the sun whatsoever, because the sun is not actively engaged, and there's no deficiency in the sun. There's no. The sun causes a drought. It doesn't matter to the sun. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. The sun doesn't care whether the sun hits the earth and everyone's all happy because spring is here, or whether it's a cloudy day and it doesn't. That's of no consequence to anybody or anything. I shouldn't say it. So no consequence to the sun or sunlight. She'ein ha'or me'ir lamata kol ze ein ha'oisa shum shinui be'etzem. In a cloudy day, when the light, in fact, does not reach its target. It does not reach, you say, well, the whole point of sunlight is to make the flowers grow. Yeah, well, they didn't grow because the sunlight never reached them. Why? Because there are these clouds. So now there's a hasar, now there's a problem, now there's a difficulty. It didn't reveal itself lamata. Etzem couldn't care less. It makes no difference. It's the same sun, going to emit the same or. It's of no consequence whatsoever. So everything of sun in sunlight is b'derech mamela, it's automatic, and it's a very passive process. It's not passive in the sense that the or is actively generated. It is actively generated, but the generation itself is not focused or intended or directed. The sun is created as a luminary. It has a job description. Give off sunlight. That's all you got to do, and that's what it does. Or we have a similar situation lamaila, and this touches on what Jack was asking before, and it gets a little bit tricky, but we'll navigate our way through it. V'yoven l'mayla b'b'chinas arin saif shenikra b'shem or shehu b'chinas gilui etzem. So l'mayla we talk of or because it's gilui etzem. So or in some way reveals the creative power of the Creator, in some authentic way, in some real way, in some unchanged way, in some way not distorted by agendas or focus or a particular purpose. The creative power of the Creator is revealed in or, because or is ma'ayna ma'or, reflects the ma'or, and the dimension of ma'or that we're talking about is the Creator. Now, a few caveats here. We have to be very careful. The Rebbe Rashab is not a ma'or. because a ma'or is a luminary. The Rebbe Shalom is not a luminary, and or is, even though it's b'derech mamela in terms of its process, in the way it emerges, it is not b'derech mamela in terms of the fact that it has to happen. It's not mukhrach. The Rebbe Shalom is, he say, well, I'm looking at Ephraim. So how come I can say, how do I see him? What am I seeing? I'm seeing Ephraim. I'm not seeing Ephraim at all. I'm seeing light which is reflected from Ephraim, which is impinging on my eyes and telling me, there's my friend out there, and that's exactly what he looks like. It truly reflects, the light that's hitting my eyes truly reflects what Ephraim looks like. That is b'derech mamel. But he has no choice over that. That's what he looks like. That's the or he's going to reflect. That's what's going to come into my eyes. So the process is the same. The process of gilui, of or from etzem, is b'derech mamel in the sense that it is not constricted, it is not nitvis, but it is not b'derech mamela in the sense that it's automatic. There is no automatic by God. Everything ultimately is with a ratzon. The or shuhu b'chin is gilui etzem. So gilui etzem ve'ein oisus shum shinui b'spilus ba'amor. It does not cause any hispilus in the ma'or. Okay, which from our point of view, now we're talking chas v'sholom. Here we have a chas v'sholom. In the mashal, we don't have a chas v'sholom because we don't need one. Here we need one. Chas v'sholom, there's no hispilus in the ma'or. In terms of the technical process, so if it did cause hispilus in the ma'or, then you have a problem with the pasuk. What would the problem be? What's the pasuk? Lo shenisi, I do not change. If the creation of the universe caused it was not b'derech mamela, and it touched etzem, so then there's a difference in etzem before the world was created and after the world is created. It's not the same etzem. Now etzem has a new toy, or however you want to look at it. I can't find words. But there's some kind of change in etzem. But or is not poil hispilus in etzem, not poil shinui in etzem. That's the wonder of or, between the Arizal and the Alter Rebbe, the miracle of putting together this concept of or, being able to reveal it to us in our generation, gives us the whole Chassidus that we can get something of a handle on. So the or, as it's manifest, causes no hispilus whatsoever. And no, doesn't require hisaskus either. It's b'derech mamela. Are we all right on this? V'hu levadoihu. He's alone. He was alone before the world was created. He was alone after the world was created. So where does the world come into play? Oh, or. That's or. Or, well, there's a big difference. Yes, there's a big difference for us. But for him, there's no difference whatsoever. He remains the same. That, again, is the godless of the concept of or, the wonder of the concept of or. Tzimtzum, which is an or, is not in etzem. There's a lot of Chassidus involved in this. Explained elsewhere by Riches. V'gam ba'or ha'ma'ir ma'ein soif hu gam kein ein boy shinu v'spilus. In the or itself, there's no change or spilus. Im er b'hakev, same thing, whether it comes into Kalim or it doesn't come into Kalim, because the or is bittul betachlis to the ma'or. It's ayin be'etzem. That's what we call or ayin. It has no reality in and of itself. It is a revelation from its source, and it's a true revelation from its source. The hubchin is helim v'gili, whether it's behelim, whether it's gili, is of no consequence to the or. Was explained elsewhere. Even there's no concept really of tfisa and hislapshus. Well, you could have fooled me. What about Aris of Atzilus? Isn't that not betfisa? Is that not behislapshus? You've got Aris and Kalim. What's a sphere? A sphere consists of Aris and Kalim. The Or inside, very nice. And you have the Or mamish evolving, which we'll get into later on in this maamar, from Or inside, which is Pashut B'tachlis. You've got Kav. You've got Ak, Akudim, and then Akudim. We've got Nukudim, which is Oilam Hatayu. Finally, we have Atzilus down the end of the lines. A lot of things have been going on. A lot of change, a lot of evolution going on here. To finally you get Aris v'Kalim. Well, is not the Or Meluvish in Kalim? Is not the Or Nitvis in Kalim? Yes, in a sense, and from a different perspective. But from the perspective we're talking about, no, because Hislapshus and Tfisa implies Shinui, and the Or stays Or, even as it's enclosed in the Kalim. It's a very important concept for us.
Find that perspective.
Pardon? We're defining it because that's the perspective the maamar takes.
No, what?
Our perspective right now is simply or. We're not interested in what Atzilus produces. We're not interested in Giluyim from Atzilus. We're not interested even in the properties of Atzilus. All we are interested in is, all we're talking about is or. And from the perspective of or stays or. Okay? So even, we use a lashon, it's Lubavitch and Kalim. That's a tremendous meaning for the Keli. Okay? It's nitvis in Kalim. Tremendous significance for the Keli. The or stays or. Again, we're talking, this maamar is very focused. You're quite right, there are many questions could be asked, and we could see it from other dimensions. But if we regard our focus and our perspective as simply trying to understand what is or and how it operates, that's where we're at now. In the case of Shefa, big change. Or haseichel, as it comes into a shear that you give a 10-year-old, is a shinui mamish, it's mishana. There's a mamish, it's Lubavitch and Mishalim. Mishalim is a mashal is a davar zar, it's an alien thing altogether. It comes b'derech tzimtzum, it comes with analogies, it comes with stories. Big shinuyim in the or itself. So finally, the or you get when you're teaching a child, what the child is getting is not the or hanimshal, it's getting the or hamashal. It's a big change. But none of that is applicable to Tzilus because we're not talking about Shefa, we're talking about or. Are we okay? I realize it's a very sophisticated point, guys, but I want to make sure everyone's happy with it before we proceed. Okay, so everyone's happy. Yeah? All right. Shor Pashut. This, the two words describe everything we've said up till now. It really is these two words, or is Pashut. Pashut is Pashut. Stays that way. What does Pashut mean? Uncompounded, undifferentiated, uncompartmentalized, simple Pashut B'tachlis Pshitus. As explained elsewhere. However, the truth is, Ein Amoshel Da'or Hashemesh Doim L'Nimshel. Very nice. The or, we're bouncing back and forth with these mishalim. The or of the sun is not really comparable to the nimshal, which is etzem and or. The or hashemesh ha'meir ma'hashemesh hu hechrochi. Why? Because here's where it breaks down. The or of the shemesh has no choice. It's got to leave. The sun has to give off or. It has no choice. It can't decide, I'm sick this morning, I'm not going to work. It has to leave. The sun is a luminary. A luminary is a unidimensional thing, the point of which is to give off light. It's not dependent upon the sun, whether or comes out or not. The sun has no say in the matter, whether it illuminates or it does not illuminate. It's got to give light. That's what it's created for. It was created as a luminary to give off light, to illuminate. It's on the earth. In fact, that's where all our energy ultimately comes from, presumably. If this is not the case in Ein Sof, there is no b'derech mamela. Harei ha'meir b'retzaynai. Who? Shmai. Well, it's automatic. It's not automatic. The concept of shmai is a chiddush. Why does he need a shmai? He's alone. You're sitting by yourself on a desert island. Do you need a name? No. Is the name of any use to you? No. Does the name have any significance for you? No. He's alone. What do you mean name? It's a whole new dimension here. It means he stepped out of himself a little bit. A shame is only for what? For someone to call you. For a zulus. For something aside from yourself. Something outside of yourself. So all of a sudden we have this or, which we can call shame, just as well. And it's not quite the same as who. It truly reflects who, although not the whole who, but it reflects who. But it is not who. There are two. Now we have two words. We only had one word. Atzmos Eitzav. Ein oid milvado. There's only him, right? Now there's him, and there's this other stuff called shame. Not really other stuff. It's really bittul betachlis. It's really ayin, and in essence, it's really only a yechelis, a potential to illuminate, to irradiate. But again, we use gilui, illumination, irradiation. all implies there's someone to receive it, because illumination, revelation mean nothing if there's only him. So there's something, as a movement of some sort, which we cannot find lashon for, toward being, toward existing, toward creating. So this R is not like sunlight. That's not a movement toward anything. It's just natural illumination from a luminary. That's all. He's not a luminary. So this R already provides us with a brand new concept, the concept of creation, the concept of creator. It's not b'derech mail, it's not automatic. Ki im kasher ola b'ratzayne she'ir ha'or lamata. However, it came up to his ratzon that there should be or revealed below. Mamelu humir, therefore, there it goes. It's automatic. In other words, it did not require thought, hisaskus, work, tfisa. That came up to ratzon, and therefore that's what is. That's the idea of b'derech mamela. The b'derech mamela is the process, not the source of the process. Therefore, what's necessary for this? Olas man. You got to have olas man. What's olas man? Olas man is you got to do something. There is no or without you doing something. Why? Because the nature of or is to be davak to b'makarei. And not only that, but the fact that there is even such a thing as or is b'ratzoinus, according to his ratzon. And the whole tachlis of everything is for olas man, is for the avodah of Adam. And therefore the process of drawing down or into Kalim really depends in the original, in the will of Atzmus, that there will be an avodah b'mi nimlach. Who did he consult? Well, where did that come into play? What do you mean, who did he consult? Yeah, I'm just trying. I have this thought maybe to create a world. I have to consult. He's alone. Hu v'shmai echad, or hu v'echad v'shmai echad. Who does he? B'mi nimlach. It's medrash. Who did he consult? B'nishmai seim shel tzadikim. He consulted the neshamas of the city. Where did they come from? Because they're higher than all of this process. They have a veto power. And what did he consult them about? Whether there would be, to have tainug, to have delight, to have pleasure. He himself to have pleasure in the avodah of Adam, in olas man, in the work and in the avodah of the Jewish people, and by extension the rest of the world. And this is the whole point. And this is so the or, even though in terms of the process of its emergence is automatic and requires no special processing, there's a will behind it, and the will is a very specific and focused will, unlike sunlight. Yeah.
I just find the last two sentences or phrases contradictory. He says, he says, Ki im kasher ola b'tzoyin shior ha'or lamatim nemelu hu meir. So suddenly you're saying that it's ola b'tzoyin, and now you're saying something else.
So let's go back to the b'mi nimlach. Ola b'tzoyin is what happened? Nothing. Because we know from Samach Vav there are levels and ratzons. Let's say a ratzon muchlet. Not a bad idea. Okay? B'mi nimlach. Who did he consult? This is what is the ultimate cause of the emergence of or to a state of gili. Nishmai seim shel tzadikim. Even at the highest level of beginning of everything, ultimately is olas man. The beginning of everything is avodas Yisrael. The Rebbe's not going in detail here because we don't need it right now. It's just indicating to you that there's a very big difference between light coming from the sun without change and light coming from etzem without change. In terms of causal factors, the light coming from the sun, there are no causal factors. It's a luminary. In terms of light coming from etzem, there are critical causal factors which ultimately make themselves realized and felt down here. Which is one of the reasons there's all this complicated abstract stuff. What's the point? The point is that all this is dependent upon you guys and me. And we're going to see how and why.
So when it says ola b'tzoyin, it really is talking about olas man.
No, well, no, the ultimate ratzon is for olas man. Yes. Pardon?
When we do a mitzvah, we're the ratzon.
You're not mar the ratzon. When you do a mitzvah, you're mamshech or. Because we're going to see. We're going to get there. This is a very brief introduction into where we're going.
When he says ola b'tzoyin, does he mean for the purpose of olas man?
Ultimately, yes.
Okay. All right.
Again, the nature of or is to retreat. The nature of or is dveikus. That's why or eluki, the or of godliness, is we have that mashal of eish, because its nature is to ascend, to recede. The Lord your God is a consuming fire. The teva eish lahefach legamre miteva shemesh. Therefore, the nature of fire is totally different from that of the shemesh. The shemesh simply gives off or. Eish tends to ascend. Shahari Hashemesh Yeir Orei Lamata Dafka. The whole point of the sun is simply to illuminate. Eicha or Mistalik Beguf Amor Hashemesh. Avein or, the or does not withdraw. The or that comes into this world does not seek its source, does not withdraw. It simply is mispojit. Vahesha Nimshach Meisha Yisadi. On the other hand, fire that descends from its supernal source, Tevoy Listalik Leklal Makarei Aisha Yisadi. Its nature is to be subsumed within its source Lamaila. That's why we have the two Mashalim. So the fact now that number one, or is B'derach Mamela, like sunlight. Unlike sunlight, it is b'ritzainus. It is with ratzon. It is intended, and the fact that it's teva. Now we don't know. So say, how do we explain this teva to be dovek? Well, we can explain it a little bit, even though we just call it teva. The fact that it tends to be dovek, first of all, is wonderful because it truly reflects, feels, and truly is identified with its source. So it's real and authentic. It's a real authentic revelation of its source. And the fact that it is created, it has a teva of being dovek, means that in order to get it, in order to make it go down, a condition has to be fulfilled. It requires olasman. So the teva of or to be dovek to b'makar, the nature of light to cleave to its source, is a words are coming to mind which are not great words. It's a mechanism which immediately puts into place, from day one, before it's symptom, before anything, puts into place the concept of the avodah of a human being. Because did it not, if it were like sunlight, and its nature were not to be dovek b'makare, everything would be just hunky-dory down here. We wouldn't have to do anything. The world would be just skittles and beer, and everything would be fine. But this teva of or is such that it fulfills a ratzon which is even higher than the ratzon for olamais, which is a ratzon for olasman, for avodah of Jewish people. So the entire process of bringing or ein soif into atzilus, and from there downward, is the product ultimately of olasman, which means putting on tefillin, tzedakah, Shabbos, you name it. That's what the story is all about. Okay, Rabbi Sahib will. Is this making any sense to anybody?
Beautiful.
You said
Yeah.
Alois Lamala. You said that's the
Nature.
the point of all this.
Oh, the point of all of this is for you, through your reaching up, to schlep down.